You're listening to a Brother Asks and Building Better Builders video education series production.
Welcome back to the Craftsman Online podcast. This is a weekly half-hour program focused on the relevant topics in Freemasonry and the various aspects of the craft. Any opinions, thoughts, or viewpoints shared during this program are that of the individual and do not reflect the position of any Grand Lodge, appendant, or concordant body from which that member may hail. I'm your host, Brother Michael Arce, the editor-in-chief of Craftsman Online, and joining us for this very special episode on Building Better Builders, is the first in our series on sharing our light, is Brother John S. Nagy. Welcome to the Craftsman Online podcast, Brother Nagy.
Brother Michael, thanks for having me. It's an honor and a privilege.
Brother Nagy, you might recognize him from the many years that he's put into the craft. He's a member of Pearl of the West Masonic Lodge number 146 in Newport Richey, Florida, and the Florida Lodge of Research. He's a 32nd degree Mason, a 2014 recipient of the Dwayne E. Anderson Award for Excellence in Masonic Education, and Masonic Education provider to lodges that support his efforts to share. He's also the author of the Better Builders series of uncommon Masonic education books, videos. He's done workshops. I see him up in the morning at like 2 or 3 o'clock with his Facebook posts. So there's really no better person I could think of as we started this series when we talked about sharing the light. And that's the whole thing with Freemasonry, is that we're all about promoting the idea of making good men better. And this enlightenment is provided in the lessons that come for our ritual, and also in the relationships from the brothers in our lodge and the wealth of Masonic literature that exists in publication. But how and sometimes where we start our path, that's a big question. And that's why I've asked Brother Nagy to join us on this special series. So many of our audience might recognize you from the Building Better Builders Masonic books and talks. And as an author who has written so deeply on all of the various aspects of the Blue Lodge, what was the first Masonic question you asked? I want to get back to that beginning. And who did you ask it to?
That's a great question. And I remember because it was a fellow minister. We were at a ministerial class just talking about black ops and secret organizations, and I brought up the Freemasons, and I asked, what exactly is Freemasonry? And, well, not only did he explain it to me, but he asked me if I wanted to join, and the moment that I said, well, sure, he whipped out a petition and said, I was waiting for you to ask. He had already put my name on the paper and signed it and filled it all out for me. And it just tells me how much he wanted me to be part of a love affair that he has had with the organization. And, well, it started mine rolling too.
That's what fascinates me. Somebody with your pedigree, you would think that you sought out the light that's promised in Freemasonry, but it was really just a by chance coincidence question that you just happened to ask the right person.
Well, it was a lead up. I had a wonderful, wonderful neighbor from Cuba. He was a refugee, and he had made it up to, I think, the 14th or 15th degree in Scottish Rite, because they went the long form. You had to go through and, wait a year and then go through again the next level. And he corrupted me. He basically invited me over for dinners and wine and talked philosophy and theology. And I finally asked him, where are you getting all this information from? And he revealed to me that he was a Mason from Cuba. And he said, you're a Mason too, John. You just haven't joined the organization officially. And it was some of that information that I was relaying to my ministerial friend. And he kind of knew the background. So he had it all warmed up and ready to go for me when I finally asked.
Now, I know you as John Nagy, Brother John Nagy from Facebook and the Building Better Builders series. And you've written and you've spoken many times on the subject of coaching and mentorship. Your website, for example, every day there's an article that addresses those themes or that topic. And it got me thinking about a close friend of mine who's a personal trainer in the fitness world. And when he was working out with one of his client asked him, are your goals my goals? And they had a conversation about the whole coach, mentor, trainer relationship. How do you define those? And what is the specific difference, in your opinion, between a coach and a mentor?
Well, let's address the first question about having to do with the goals. And as a coach, my goal is to support my client, not the actual goals themselves. As I support my client, as they choose to be, what comes from that being actually brings about certain doing and brings about the outcomes. So I have to stand by my client rather than the goals, and always focus on who they are choosing to be at one particular moment or not. And of course, with a coaching relationship, I am empowered to help them hold themselves accountable. And how does that work? Well, basically, I'm not the one holding them accountable. They do that themselves, but I'm an accountability source. So when they stop talking about things that they claim are important, I bring up the fact that they're not talking about it anymore. And if they don't want to talk about it, I'll clearly spell out, okay, so this is something that you don't want me to help you hold yourself accountable to any longer. So I put their feet up to the fire with owning their change in direction. And the moment that they don't want to talk about what it is that they said they wanted to accomplish is the moment I bring it up and say, okay, so you're no longer empowering me to help you hold yourself accountable to this by virtue of you not wanting to talk about it any further. That's a yes or a no. So they have to face their decision outwardly rather than inwardly. And that's part of coaching. But coaching is about performance, and it's about improvement. And the goal of coaching is to help somebody become better overall. There's overlap with mentoring. Mentoring is more about guidance. There is an investment on the part of the mentor for the protege in their career or life, and they're supporting either one, shortening the learning curves so that they don't have to spend so much time learning the ropes. And that's what a mentor's all about, is helping them learn the ropes, learn the paths, learn the shortcuts, learn who to talk with about what and how. There is performance in that. Like I said, there's an overlap, but a mentor is more about guiding a person along a path, whereas a coach is more along the performance of any specific improvement area that person is working toward. It's totally different from the craft, though, by the way. Craft, we use the word coach, mentor, instructor, and trainer, utterly different from the real world.
Right. Well, most of us, when you hear the word coach, you immediately think of, at gym or being on a team, somebody with a whistle and a hat telling you to run faster, or play better. And then a mentor would be that professor or teacher or adult or older, mature figure in life that you seek out for the guidance and the knowledge. And you're right that in many Masonic lodges, you'll have a brother who's been designated or assigned to be the education officer or the mentor for the lodge. And basically for us, that means they're being tasked with teaching the ritual proficiency for the new brothers as they go through the degrees. And sometimes, this can be assigned to somebody, or there's those that seek out this role. What advice would you give to a brother who would find themselves to suddenly be in the role of the education officer or mentor of their lodge?
Well, first of all, your heart's got to be in it. That's number one. Number two, if you're doing education for a group, you got to make sure that the group is interested in what it is that you want to share. If you've been tasked with Grand Lodge line items, you have to be really sure that you want to be teaching that kind of stuff. As far as a mentor is concerned, well, we use the word mentor and coach in the proficiencies and learning about the craft in general. Unfortunately, much of the mentoring that goes on is guided by the hand of the Grand Lodge, and you're given manuals and materials to go over, and they tell you exactly how you're supposed to do it. And I was in that role for about 2 or 3 years. I finally had to hand it off because the mentorship that I knew the candidates needed was not the mentorship that the Grand Lodge was wanting me to provide. A mentorship that they were wanting me to provide was basically reading or summarizing information out of manuals. Mm. And I wanted to make sure that I was mentoring the candidate along the lines of where their interests lie and basically what they needed to know to maximize their experience of the organization of Freemasonry. There was a conflict. As far as the coaching is concerned, I find proficiencies to be antagonistic in one way. The memorization that goes on, the candidates don't understand what they're learning. And it makes it sometimes 10 times harder to memorize stuff when you have no traction on what it is that you're learning about. And so when I'm coaching, I'm taking the time to explain the different facets of the proficiencies that they're learning. And they come out of the experience, well, better bonded with the coach because now there's a relationship and there's a lot of trust that is put forth in that experience, but they better understand what ritual is directing them to do. So therefore their Q&A goes a lot smoother. It's more like there's spirit behind the words as opposed to just repeating, like we talk about the parrots. I don't want a parrot as a candidate coming through. So what do you look for? Well, you want to make sure that you're a right fit for the job to begin with, because there are specific guidelines that you have to plug and play into. And if you can't conform to that, or at least make it work for your personality and what your interests are for the candidate, it's best not to even jump in. However, if you can massage it so that it works really well, your next question is there a good fit between you and the candidate? Mm. And I've had some candidates that fit very well, and I had others that they would tell me to meet them at a certain time and place, and I'd wait around 15, 20 minutes and finally text them, and I found out that they were still at work, and they didn't have the courtesy to contact me after I had traveled 20 minutes out of my way and waited another 15, 20 minutes. Not a good fit. And so there has to be a respect on the part of the candidate and an ability for you to say, no, this isn't a good fit. When it's a great fit, good God, it's like magic on ice cream.
I'm just thinking, the poor guy that stands you up like that. It's when you wish that you were a coach with a whistle and you could have him run some laps after practice to toughen him up a little bit and learn a lesson. But it's interesting when you're talking about this, because often, brothers will get into talking about their favorite position or chair, for lack of a better term, in lodge. And, most guys that I'll talk to will say, oh man, I really love being senior deacon. And I enjoyed it as well. But my favorite role in the lodge was the year that I got to be the quote unquote education officer and really work with the new brothers that were coming through. And I found that rewarding for myself, because that was the year that my passion got reignited in Masonry, because their questions pushed me to find answers and kind of rekindle that relationship with our ritual and the craft.
One of my most memorable experiences was when a candidate asked me about the hecatomb. I don't know if your jurisdiction has a hecatomb being spoken of during ritual, but mine does. And so do many other organizations around there that are Freemasonic. They talk about the hecatomb. And he asked me about it, and I gave him the party line. It's 100 head of oxen and sacrificed. And as I said that to him, I heard myself saying, but let's not stop there. How about you go away and explore, and I go away and explore, and we'll come back together tomorrow and see what information we can dredge up out of the resources that we have at hand. And when I went on that quest, because I really wanted to come to the table for my candidate, my protege, and have something worthy of my efforts. And as a result, I found out information that I would have never found out had I not taking the time to do the research and answer a simple question from a candidate. And it was, it's indelible. I loved it. I loved it so much I wrote about it.
Right. Well, and as an esoteric brother, I'm sure you'll get this example that I'm giving, but there are 2 times that I love to talk to new Masons. And the first time is the first night when they take their first degree, and I ask them, okay, I want you to tell me what the first thing is, the first question that comes to your mind, ask me, because we can talk about this now. After all these, weeks and months of buildup for this moment to happen, and you thinking you knew what Freemasonry was about, ask me this question. What did you want to know about what you experienced tonight? I equate that to like if I was able to talk to a newborn and ask them what that birthing process was like, right? And then the second time I like to talk to them is, of course, after they're raised to the sublime degree of Master Mason, because that would be, in my mind, being able to ask, my son or an adult member of my family or a close friend, like, what is it like now that you're a father and you've seen this next generation come through? And see, you're shaking your head, so you understand the kind of the Masonic tie there. But yeah, those 2 moments I find to be the most rewarding. Of course, all the other questions that come up, if you're fortunate enough to sit with the newer brothers on the sidelines, or they feel like they can come and approach you and ask you questions, those are just as rewarding too.
Agreed, very much so. I'd like to rewind a little bit. In the very beginning, you had mentioned the making good men better. And I love the phrase. I love the sentiment. But whenever I hear it, I love to stress the fact that, no, it's not Freemasonry that's making good men better. It's the work that you do based on what ritual points to. And the more that you investigate ritual, the more that you become aware of what it is that will make you better. There's 2 aspects of betterment that I like to ask candidates about, because when I ask them about that phrase, making good men better, I say, what do you want to better? And I find 2 different categories. One is just overall increase in value, improvement in their skills and comprehension and what have you. But the other one stems from the fact that if you're a good man, well, how do you make a good man better? And that basically has to do with morality. And we are part of an organization who points toward improving the morality of our members. And that's how we make them better. And we are continually putting brothers in situations where they have to choose just ever so slightly a morally better option as they go through life, choosing between work and family and the lodge is one of the biggest moral dilemmas sometimes, because you've made an obligation. However, I love that cable tow. It's a beautiful instrument. And the moment that your outside activities, your obligations take precedent, you know exactly what you have to do morally. You have to say no or rearrange your schedule. I think that there's not enough emphasis on supporting our brothers and taking the moral high ground, other than occasionally hearing, remember your obligation.
Right. There's also, I think, a lack in some lodges, unfortunately, when it comes to Masonic education, because they feel that just getting the degree proficiency, that kind of covers it, or being able to perform the ritual for the degrees, that kind of covers Masonic education. And maybe it does, but you're an example of someone who has sought more light in Masonry and then has also shared it, which is why you're on our podcast, because we're talking about, the idea of building better builders. And, for those that are in the process of seeking light in Masonry, I'm sure this is going to seem like a really odd question, but is there a proper etiquette or a manner of asking somebody these questions? Similar to when you would ask like a celebrity or a world leader for an autograph. Is there a proper time and place to do this? And how do you How would you prefer to have that?
Well, my door is open the moment I wake up in the morning to the moment that I close everything down at night. I get a lot of chatter through private messaging, and brothers would say, if you've got a moment and you can respond, I have a question. And if I'm right there, or I just pick up the message, I let them know right off the bat, fire away. I'm here for you. And a lot of it's typed in. Sometimes it's a moral question. Sometimes it's a light question. Sometimes it's an operational question. But they come in 24/7 at times. And even when I'm asleep, I'll get private messages coming in. And sometimes when I post on a wall, somebody will say, I have a question, but I don't want to ask it here. I go, PM me. And if I'm in a live chat, such as this one or some of the Zoom calls, I prefer to wait until I'm done with the presentation. Unless, of course, I'm doing a workshop that's 6.5 hours. Then I say to them, I'm here for you. You're not here for me. I purposely put myself in the position of servant during those presentations. And I say, if you have any questions whatsoever, interrupt me because I'm going to be hammering away like a machine gun until I get a stopping point. And sometimes when I see a hand go up or somebody lean forward and say, but, for me, it's a relief. I get a chance to get out of that delivery mode and be able to provide something that's really specific to the brother. The biggest challenge is sometimes right after a delivery of a presentation when I'm coming down, the adrenaline is starting to taper off, and I'm basically closing up shop, and people want to come and talk. And what I have to do is I have to consciously interrupt whatever I'm doing and make sure I'm focusing on looking the person in the eye, because my mind is, all right, I did a presentation. Now it's cleanup. Oh yeah. Okay. I got to ask questions, answer questions now. All right. Stop the cleanup. And those are the challenging times. However, most brothers come up and just say, do you have a moment? Or I have a question I think you can answer. Do you have a moment? That secondary, do you have a moment or do you have time? It's such a wonderful courtesy, because what it does is it allows me to consider, okay, can I interrupt what I'm doing right now, or would it be a better time for me to respond? Well, online, if it's a PM, obviously I can answer at any time I want. But what I usually do is I try to respond immediately, and I try to say, I'm available in about an hour. Why don't you type out your question, and when I get back to it, I'll respond. And so at that point, I try to set my timer and make sure that in an hour I get back to them as I had promised.
I think that's part of the problem that we have, because we do live in this on-demand, instant, text messaging kind of society where people expect that. I also have the opposite problem where if I have a brother that asks me a question, I'm like, I need to be respectful of your time, because my phone call back to you could be an hour long because of me wanting to talk with you. So I'm like, oh, that's right. Some people don't have that luxury at work where you make your own time and have your own schedule. I wanted to get to this because it was you and I had a series of conversations as we were arranging the podcast, and I had made a reference to a book that I've started reading that you're very familiar with. It's A Hero with 1,000 Faces. It's the great work.
Campbell.
Yes. And I made a comment about, reading the book and, joking with you about how I didn't feel like I was old enough to be that sagey old wise man. And you got it. And I'm like, oh, he was so nice to laugh at that. Later, I was looking at your blog, and I've seen you've referenced Campbell's work several times in your writings. I'm interested what you've learned from Campbell that's kind of aided in your personal Masonic journey.
Oh, gosh. I got introduced to him about 32 years ago, and I fell in love with his lectures. I watched The Power of Myth, and it's actually 6 hours of interviewing with Bill Moyers. And I must have watched that over the years, maybe 20 or 30 times, try to pull them out once a year just to kind of review them. And then he came out with it after he had passed away, the foundation came out with something called Transformations of Myth Through Time, which were a series of 14 videos that had him, in 13 of them, lecturing on various aspects of the religions of the world. Several hours on Hinduism and Buddhism, some on Christianity, sometimes the mystical religions, the Native American Indians, Judaism, Islam. He covered 14 hours of either, the first hour was about him and his life and what he had accomplished during his life as an honorarium to the start of the show, and then 13 hours of interreligious study on symbolism. And what did I learn? Well, I learned not to concretize my myths, my own myths, to look through the veil and see what light is casting the image that I have held sacrosanct, and making sure that I don't idolize it. Stepping out of the literal and into the figurative, never assuming the offered myth was to be understood out of context. I'll give you a slight example of that. In the New Testament, Jesus is asked 3 different questions. One is about, somebody slapped somebody in the face, and he said, turn the other cheek. Another one was, somebody demands my robe off my back as payment, and he said, well, give me your shirt as well. And the last was, I'm being asked basically to carry something, a mile. And he said, well, go the extra mile. I'll cover the last one and let you guess about the other 2, but each and every one was within the context and traditions and law of the time. And when you were asked to carry something a mile, it was typically the Roman soldiers who were occupying your territory. And there was a law that you had to drop everything you were doing and carry whatever they demanded that you carry for 1 mile. That was the law. And there was a gratuitous burden. You were required to do it, and you were not going to get paid. Well, Jesus knew at that time what the laws were. And what he said is, we'll go the extra mile. And that basically turned the tables on the burdening Roman soldiers by, if you grabbed the hold of that equipment that they wanted you to carry and literally run down that road 2 miles, well, you had to get paid for that second mile. And it was a law, and the soldier had to pay it out of his own pocket. And if you did it immediately and had witnesses, you could hold the soldier accountable, and their leaders, the soldiers, captains in command, would basically get very upset at the soldiers. So the soldiers, how long do you think before the soldiers in that area would stop asking to carry the equipment? Right. Because these people would take a hold of it and run down the road 2 or 3 miles and demand payment, and they had to get paid. So if you don't understand the context of the time, you're going to have a minister who turns around and says, well, you just extend yourself for the other person will appreciate it. No, if you go the extra mile, they're not going to appreciate it. In fact, it's going to burden them financially. And that's exactly what Jesus was sending the message to. Joseph Campbell taught me how, through his lectures and his books, how to scrutinize the well-accepted dogma interpretations of a lot of these parables in my own faith and other faiths, so that I didn't get trapped into doing stuff that would be absolutely detrimental to me. And so I still am a student of Joseph Campbell. I believe very much in the discipline that he demands of people who want to explore as he has. It's very entertaining if you don't want to explore, but for me, he was a mentor. Very much.
It's always interesting to me, and I'll put this into the example of like a professional athlete, that professional athletes have trainers, they have coaches to help them operate at a higher level. And you see them play on Sundays or, if you're a baseball fan, whenever they're playing. and you go, oh, I could do that. Or I used to be able to do that. It's probably what most of us say now. We used to.
Yeah, that's the ticket.
Until you see their workout and you're like, this guy is doing push-ups with like one finger and I struggle to do 10 with help. You know, when you see the road that they take, you see how they can operate the way that they do it, what it looks like it's at ease. In the context of being a Masonic coach or a mentor to other Masons, it's always interesting to kind of get that peek behind to see, okay, you have a brother who's asking you a profound question in their mind, but to see the peak that you're at with where you're going, it's like, wow, this is, I still have some work I need to attain to that. It was interesting. One of the inspirations that I kind of had when it came to teaching is from an extremely unlikely source. Alec Baldwin hosts a podcast called Here's the Thing. Mm-hmm. And he had the violin great Itzhak Perlman on. And Itzhak was talking about, you know, being a child prodigy and how he just became this phenomenal world-class violin player basically at birth with very little help from teaching. And then he was thrust into the role of teaching other people. And the best advice that he could give for teaching is that when you have incredible talent in front of you, leave them alone. And I found that to be so moving because I found myself in a situation as a lodge mentor working with one of those individuals who asks the larger questions that I never thought to ask and had to do the thing that you had done with, you had mentioned earlier. Well, let's go research this together and come back and talk about what we've learned. There's just certain things that you just can't know. So I'm curious, you know, you kind of gave an example how you've continued to grow and learn from your encounters. There has to be a give and take that's happened with the brothers in the craft.
I love messengers, and every last one of them are messengers to me. They have to ask what they represent to me at any one particular moment, particularly if I'm emotionally stirred by the interaction. I have to ask what they remind me of if I'm harking back to previous relationships. Continually asking what new messages they might be carrying for me specifically. And I try to seek to understand first, then be understood. I love the Stephen Covey 7 Habits. I already know from my own personal journey what a win is for me. I know deep down in my heart when I'm interacting with people what wins are in that interaction. I don't know what a win is for the person that's before me. I don't know what they want to carry away as a consequence of their interaction with me. And until I understand what that is, what a win is, how are we going to synergize? How are we going to work toward a mutually beneficial interaction so that we both absolutely walk away with something of greater value as a consequence of our input? Mm-hmm. I find the Socratic method helps tremendously, particularly with proteges and individuals who are seeking light. I firmly believe that they could find it on their own. And do I spoil the opportunity for them to cultivate some mental muscle by just giving them the answer? Or do I give them some suggestions or ask from them, you know, well, if you would seek this out from another source that wasn't a person, where would you start? So I try to cultivate the mental and spiritual and emotional muscles that they have so that they naturally develop the strengths that they need to for that next stage. And providing, brother, I have done a lot of reading, a lot of research, and a lot of writing over the 20 some odd years I've been a Mason, and a few years before that too on other topics. I often ask myself, am I giving too much information away? Am I preventing somebody from doing their own search? And the fact of the matter is, if I put stuff down and I show them how I came about doing it, they're following what it is that I'm doing and to how I got the answer as opposed to the actual answer that I try to stress in my books. You know, how did I come about the answer? It's not enough just to give the answer. What is my best thinking toward providing an answer to you? Here's how I went about it. Years ago, there was a big fad on mastermind groups, brainstorming. And unfortunately, a lot of those groups were groups where they would just give their best ideas. You know, one guy would say, I have a problem, and everybody would provide their solutions. And I had an opportunity to experience a true mastermind group where the answers were not provided. What happened is I got my group members' best thoughts on my problem. And they would ask not only how I went about looking at the problem, how I framed the problem, but they would frame the problem differently. And they would say, well, here's how I think I would frame it. And here's how I would go about thinking through that. And so I now had the benefit of not only how I would frame the problem and how I would come about getting a solution, but I had 7 other people providing me their best thoughts on how to look at the problem and how they would think about coming about a solution. Not the solution, but how they would go about seeking a solution. So I not only had mine, but I had 7 other methods now ingrained in my thinking. I had 8 possible ways of approaching a problem and framing it and dealing with it. That's a wonderful gift. And I learned from that when I have people coming to me, the best thing to do is get their framing, get their thinking, and then say, well, you know, if you tried this different way of looking at it, what kind of solution would become apparent for you? Or if you approached it a different way, well, how about coming from this approach? How would that change things for you? And training them to think differently by virtue of their curiosity and their willingness to invest in thinking through something differently than they would had they been left on their own. So, you know, how do I deal with brothers who come to me for questions? You've just heard it.
You answer them.
I try to find out exactly how they're approaching it, seeking first to understand before I start communicating, and trying to stay as much into that Socratic asking questions as possible. I believe that they can find it for themselves. They just have to have enough doors opened up to walk through them. Mm-hmm. And I don't know if that answers your question.
No, it does. I mean, we're blessed because throughout, you know, the centuries and, you know, the time of the existence of Freemasonry, we've been fortunate to have some of the brightest minds, you know, contributing to the craft. And you certainly have with your books, but then you continue to do that with your works, with your talks and your presentations and even coming on the podcast. So I'm excited that we formed this partnership, that we're going to be bringing you back on a monthly basis to continue our Building Better Builders series and continuing to ask. Well, I'll do my best to continue to ask the questions if you continue to answer them.
Brother, thank you so much for having me. It's been an honor and a privilege, and I'm looking forward to what is to come.
This has been the Craftsman Online Podcast. My guest this week, Brother John Nagy. If Masonic education is important to you, you can sign up for our email newsletter. That's at craftsmenonline.com. The Craftsman Online Podcast is presented by Craftsman Online, copyright 2021, with new episodes available for download Monday mornings. Until next time, let peace and harmony prevail.
You've been listening to A Brother Asks and Building Better Builders video education series production.
Beep, beep.